I want to talk briefly about a piece in Newsweek, of all places. Newsweek, which still exists, at least online. Anyway, they published something by Jeremy Lee Quinn, who has been a guest of DarkHorse twice, I believe. Yep. Jeremy Lee Quinn is a very interesting fellow. He is a journalist, a freelance journalist, who was on the ground on January 6th in Washington. He's been on the ground here in Portland. He was on the ground for riots in LA. He does seem to know where to go to see violence unfolding. In any case, he published a piece. Zach, do you want to put up the piece in question? There it is. All right. So this is a piece... Jeremy Lee Quinn, January 6th followed years of political violence. The committee should investigate leftist violence too. Now, so
fascinating.
The reason I raise this is actually two different reasons. Okay, one, Jeremy Lee Quinn is not a right-winger. In fact, he considers himself an anarchist, and at some point I'd like to have a conversation with him about what that really means. I understand him to be a very reasonable guy, and it's hard for me to imagine how any very reasonable person becomes an anarchist, but he seems to take a decidedly nuanced approach to anarchism, and I'd like to understand what the nature of it is. So stay tuned for that. At some point we'll do it. But
I feel like you talked a little bit about it in what you did.
We did. Yeah. Let's just say I still don't quite get it, and so I have a feeling that, you know, he's technically an anarchist, but doesn't mean what most of us infer from that. But nonetheless, the piece that he writes essentially says, look, January 6th was a travesty, but it exists in a context of political violence stretching back years on both sides. And it is impossible, I think, to read this piece and not realize what's going on. Now, I have not been paying attention to the January 6th committee because I know it to be theater, and I know I can't afford to grind my teeth as much as I surely would if I was tuning in. But what little I have seen and gleaned does suggest that what's going on here is an obsessive focus on the excesses of one side and a studied disinterest, what Eric calls anti-interest, in the political violence on the other side. And the problem is you can't understand what January 6th was until you realize that it was basically part of a tit-for-tat exchange that stretches back, you know, a couple of years, as I said before. So
now, before anyone gets their panties in a wad here, you are not justifying anything. You are explaining that this does not exist in a vacuum, and that we, as a country, seem to be explicitly avoiding discussion of some types of political violence and not others.
Right. But really what I'm saying is that the crime is the committee that is inherently only interested in one kind of political violence, to the extent that these people want to pretend to be serious patriots investigating a threat to the country. The threat to the country is the process that generates this kind of reaction. Right? It's not one side's version of it and the other side's version of it is just fine. That's bullshit, right? So I would invite everyone to read the article, which we will link in the description, and to just see all of the cases that Jeremy Lee Quinn puts forward and understand this committee as it's basically treason by omission. Right? By highlighting one side's excesses, exaggerating them where possible, and ignoring the excesses of the other side, which are every bit as egregious, it is creating a picture about who is a threat to the country, when in fact the lopsidedness, the double standard is the threat. Right? Understanding that we have come to a place where we've lost the ability to understand each other. We see the other side as a threat to the country, and we see there being no excess in the challenge to that kind of threat, blah, 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 blah. It's nonsense as long as it's one-sided. So, okay, the reason I have come back here is that increasingly all of the issues that we discuss are about double standards and the way they are being weaponized, right? Now, Alexandros Marinos has begun to follow this thread quite deliberately. I think it's incredibly important.